Ugh. This place looks horrible. What happened to the resolution here? Do you know what this area needs? An HD remaster. There we go. Okay, looking a bit better. Now we just need some lens flares. Perfect. Now this is a good looking room. But do you know what else has been doing a lot of these HD remakes, remasters? Zelda games. Zelda Remakes. That is what I'm gonna be ranking today. And okay, these games are specifically going to be ranked in terms of improvements that have been added, not based on which is overall the better game. I've already made a bunch of Zelda rankings where you can see what my favorite Zelda games are, which you can see in the description by the way, so it isn't gonna be based on that. It's basically which game has changed the most for the better. Also, I'm not gonna be ranking the ports or like the DX versions of the games, just the major HD upgrade remakes. Or is it remasters? Or re-releases? I don't know, I don't really care, I'm just calling them remakes for the sake of this video. So let's start off the ranking. And also, if you've been watching this ranking series of mine, you'll know that I rank a bunch of games from different series and sub-series, and I still have a lot more to come. So, you can hit subscribe if you want to know when the next ranking video is released. And with all that being said, let's get this video started. Alrighty here, so this ranking will consist of 6 Zelda remakes, and the one we're starting off here is, well, spoiler alert, it's a Zelda game. And I guess I gotta be more specific than that, so it's the Zelda game all about collecting masks. Majora's Mask 3D. What did this remake do right? Well, why don't I start with the obvious, the graphics. The N64 graphics are like the blockiest things I've ever seen, so now in this remake we got brand new models and textures for everything here. Yeah, it's not in full HD and is only on the 3DS, but still, everything looks good. Also, now you can equip more items at once and switch items easier, since all that menuing, I guess I'll call it, can now be done on the second screen. And this is actually especially helpful in this game specifically, since there's like a million mass items that you have to switch back and forth from. And now you can use the 3DS's gyro controls to aim your weapons, and they work a lot better than the N64 control stick. And then finally, there's been a few changes to some of the item placements, so they're not in as cryptic spots anymore. So all these features are pretty great. But with all these great things going for it, why is this game last on the ranking? Well, I'd say this is actually the only remake on this list that has many noticeable downgrades in it. So much so that I even prefer the original over this remake, in fact. For starters, let's talk about the bosses. They're all so weird now and not as fun to fight. They now have to be attacked in more obvious ways because they all have these dumb eye-looking weak points on them that have been added for this remake, rather than finding your own way to fight them by using any of your items. Then there's the Zora swimming that got completely messed up. They turned one of the most fun and interesting ways to swim around in any video game into the slow-paced swimming of other Zelda games. Then at random points, they just remove fun challenges that were present in the original. For example, now the ice arrows can only be shot in specific spots, so you can't go around making ice platforms in any body of water, only where indicated. So I don't really want to go on for too long in this segment, but I do know the creators of Majora's Mask were pretty unhappy with the final product. So much that while they made a lot of great improvements, they still ended up overchanging a lot of the fun things from the original, which puts it in the very last place. So Majora's Mask 3D was quite a different kind of Zelda remake because we've never seen anything like that before or since. And after that remake, they then made the first 2D Zelda remake, Link's Awakening, and then after that one, we have the most recent Zelda remake, Skyward Sword HD. And literally right off the bat with this remake, I do like the improvements in this game. Honestly, my big complaints with the original have been addressed in the remake. You can now play without motion controls, yes! Simply use the right control stick to decide what direction you want to swing your sword. Easy. Yeah, the game is still entirely designed around motion controls, but this is still a great alternative to have when the original had, well, less than stellar motion controls at times. Also, Fi, your little partner helper, now has an option to get her to shut up. Finally! 10 long years of hearing her blabbering, and you finally have the option to turn off her hints. Such a breath of fresh air. She literally spoiled puzzles and told you the most useless advice in the original game. And then finally, the item prompts don't pop up with the same text every time you get an item that you've already collected before, may I add. Sorry, there's just a lot of built-up rage from this game that has finally been fixed. These may just seem like a few minor things, but altogether, they really help the pace of this game. Okay, and that's all good, right? All those features are great improvements. But now, let's talk about the graphics. The game now runs in 1080p in 60 frames a second. And that's about it. Yeah, seriously, no new textures, models, or even lighting in this remake. Like, don't get me wrong, all those other new changes in the game are nice, but when you remake an old game on new technology, you kinda wanna see what new graphics could be added. These are the type of visuals you expect when you re-release a collection of old games or just a budget remaster. But when you take a game from 10 years ago, then make a few improvements, do virtually nothing to the visuals, and then sell it for $10 more than what the original game sold for, it's just such a lazy way of doing things. Not to mention, this is the first remake of a 3D Zelda game that had no improvement to your inventory item system since you don't have a touchpad as well. That means that there are even less improvements when compared to the others. Overall, the changes that were made were pretty great, but this is noticeably the Zelda remake with the least amount of improvements and changes included. Alright, so now I think it's time to talk about the remake for Ocarina of Time. Oh, that was a pun. I just realized that. I would never script such a thing in my videos. But regardless, this version made a lot of improvements from the N64 one. Okay, don't want to tread on previous ground too much here, but pretty well all the improvements from Majora's Mask 3D were all in this game. These are things like the new graphics, gyro controls, touchscreen item management, and having the map on the bottom screen as well. This new item system is actually really great, especially when it comes to re-equipping your clothes items. One of the big reasons why the water temple sucked in the original was that you always had to pause and re-equip your iron boots. Now, no pausing needed, and the water temple is made better because of it. Well, it's at least bearable now. They've also added a new mode in this game called Boss Challenge, and it's actually a really nice feature to have. It's so simple too, it basically just allows you to fight any boss in the game, and then you're timed on how fast you can beat it. This is so good because I love fighting certain Zelda bosses, but some of these games are so long, and I don't want to play 20 plus hours just so I can replay one fun boss at the end of the game. So yeah, I approve of this new boss battle mode. Honestly, the only thing here that was really a slight downgrade are some of the visuals. Like, don't get me wrong, overall this version looks way better. But they really brightened up a lot of the areas in this game and almost made everything look more cartoony. While it does work in places like Kokiri Forest, for example, it can really ruin the original tone in the more scary areas like the Shadow Temple. That kinda loses the more ominous feel to it. And even a lot of the more tense moments in the game kinda lose the edge to them. I did have the same problem with the Majora's Mask 3D visuals as well, but I talked enough in that segment. Still though, even with those gripes with the visuals, I do like how the game looks. And I can at least appreciate, unlike Skyward Sword, that they attempted to make the game look a lot better. So jumping right back into these console remakes here, I gotta say, I really like the changes in all three of these games that are left. So much so that I consider all of them the definitive version of each Zelda game. So let's get right into this by talking about Twilight Princess HD. I guess we can start off with the visuals here, but at first glance, it can kinda seem like nothing changed. Obviously, it's in 1080p 60 FPS, but what else is different? Well, the new HD textures are the big improvement here. In many cases, it really helps some of the walls or surfaces that looked pretty blurry and muddy in the original. And obviously, the finer details in the new textures are complemented super well with the increased resolution of the game. This allows you to see the tiniest new details included. They also cleaned up a lot of the bloom in the original game, which kinda over-blurred or over-bloomed a bit too much in the original, so everything is super clean and sharp in the remake, and the great original art style was preserved. And there's some new reflection details added, which can really be seen in the floors of the Temple of Time. So there's a lot of subtle new things like this in the remake. And because this game is on the Wii U, it also takes advantage of having a new second screen. Pretty well, to be honest, has the same benefits as the 3DS ones, it just really makes it easier to manage your items. And this game does have all the same gyro controls for aiming your arrows and other items like that, so this is all pretty great. And there's even more subtle changes that makes this game's pacing a bit better. In those wolf parts, now you only need to collect 12 Tears of Light versus 16, and yes, the original 16 did kind of drag on a bit, so this is nice. There's a new item called the Ghost Lantern that speeds up the Poe-Soul side quests, so these are all really nice to have too. You can also climb and swim faster and hold more rupees now as well. Nothing too major in this remake, if I'm gonna be honest, but there are so many subtle things done to the game's mechanics and visuals too that makes this the version I choose to replay. Alright, so the last two remakes. Some great improvements have been made to both of these games, but the runner-up, my second favorite set of new changes, has to go to The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Of course, let's start with the graphics here. See, Wind Waker is a game that actually used an art style that aged quite nicely. So when remaking it, they didn't really update the textures that much because, well, that was the art style. So instead, they created a new lighting system for the game, and this new system just makes everything in the game pop out a lot more than before. And it really highlights this art style. On top of that, they also added a bunch of bloom effects that are most noticeable when in the sun. Geez, just look at this picture. Sailing the 7 seas has never been so gorgeous. Plus in this version, the draw distance is a lot higher, so you can scout out islands a lot easier just by sailing around. So these hardware upgrades serve a gameplay purpose too. But Wind Waker, right? It's still a fantastic game, but it does have some major flaws. And this remake, I'd say, fixed all of them. But two of the biggest ones for me personally was firstly the tediousness and the speed of the sailing. It took forever to get anywhere. Introducing the Swift Sail, a new type of sail introduced in the remake that makes boating around a lot less tedious and just really fun in general. Your speed is now doubled, which is great on its own, but now the wind will change in whatever direction you're going. So you don't have to do that whole tedious Wind Waker changing every time you want to switch directions. You can just switch directions. Now you're fast and can turn easier. What a great addition. And the other big change I like about this remake is that the Triforce Shard quest has been severely shortened. This is great because it was a total pace breaker in the original and was a part I never looked forward to when replaying the game. 5 of the 8 treasure charts can now be found directly without having to decipher a chart. This is a simple change that just perfects the pacing throughout the entire game now. And then there's all the other changes like having the gamepad for your items, swinging on ropes has been made easier, and now you can hold a lot more rupees than before. Really, this one and Twilight Princess were both really close in this ranking, but what put this one ahead was really because they had a lot more big flaws to fix in the game, so overall it had more improvements than what the Twilight Princess remake had. And come on, I just really like the visuals in HD Wind Waker. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. Oddly enough, this is the only remake without a subtitle after it. Alright, fine, we'll roll with it. This game is a total night and day remake when you compare it to the original. This is a remake of the oldest game on this list because it was first released in 1993. And not even for a home console, but for the Game Boy of all systems. It had the most basic black and white sprites. And with this remake, they fully remade the world in 3D and made it 1080p 60 frames per second. And while I think the art style is, well, good, okay, it's not amazing, it is still the biggest visual upgrade out of any Zelda remake. But there's even more great improvements here. Look at the original system it was on, alright? It's a Game Boy. Key takeaway here is that there are only 2 buttons. And look at all the different items you have to use with only these buttons. So in the original, you constantly had to bring up your menu and then slowly select what items you want to swap. It was tedious and a pace killer. But with this remake, the majority of your commonly used items are now just mapped to permanent buttons that can be used at any time. The sword is mapped to B, the shield is mapped to R, and the Pegasus boots are on L. And that leaves your item slots to be used for anything else. Also, the overworld and the big rooms of dungeons. They have been turned into one continuous area versus how it was when you had to screen scroll when it was compressed on the tiny Game Boy. While this is nice in the dungeons, now that the overworld has it, it makes the entire island really come together nicely and it makes it more enjoyable to explore. Also, you can now choose where you want to warp to from the warp points rather than the tedious way of what it was before, where you had to cycle through every point and then get off where you want. And there's even a new dungeon maker in this remake. Okay, it's not that great of a feature, really. It's heavily flawed, but we've never seen a Zelda maker of any sort in any other remake or any other game for that matter. So it can kind of be cool to have here. There is a bunch more tiny improvements like these throughout the game that would just kind of be tedious to go through all of them right now. But overall, Link's Awakening on Switch just had so many upgrades from the original game that it has to take the title of the most improved Zelda remake. So those are my favorite changes in all the Zelda remakes, and with Skyward Sword HD now being released, Nintendo has re-released every single 3D Zelda game in HD. And on top of that, they've already ported all the NES and SNES Zelda games on the Switch. So you know what that means. Nintendo just has one more series of Zelda games left to remaster.
Gee, it sure is boring around here.